Welcome to the Packaging Therapist Podcast, the show where we discuss technical packaging problems so that you can solve them for your business. Today, we are talking about paperboard. Welcome to another episode of the Packaging Therapist Podcast. Today, we're joined by Tom Hoederle from Mankato Packaging. He has 30 years of experience in the paperboard industry, and he is here to help us better understand all the ins and outs of paperboard packaging. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here. So this morning, what we want to talk about is paperboard substrates. There are a lot of different types out there, but for today's conversation, we're going to focus basically on coated paperboard. There are different types of uncoated, but that's a conversation for another day. So we'll focus on coated, and we're going to focus on the most common types. There's a lot of specialty grades and things out there. Once again, a lot of different choices, and we could really, go deep into this. But for today's conversation, we're just going to keep it fairly high level and talk about the most common types that we see and use today.
That sounds good. So are you saying that in the CPG world that the coated board is most common, and we're just going to talk about that for the sake of today?
Yes, I'm not sure I would say it's the most common, but for retail, food packaging, things like that, it definitely is most prevalent.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, here we go. Different types.
Yeah, so we're going to start and kind of work. We're going to talk about some of the most common, and there's a lot of acronyms, and and a lot of whatever things that labels that the industry uses that the average consumer or average packaging marketing person may not fully understand. So the three boards that we're going to start with basically all fall under the category of coated recycled board. And within that grouping, there's subgrouping. First and foremost, we have what we call clay coated newsback, CCNB. And the reason why it's called clay coated newsback is that back in the day, when people used to read newspapers were recycled, and that was recycled and converted into paperboard. And the back of the paperboard had kind of a grayish appearance because it was old newspapers that were being recycled. Today, since readership is way down, basically we're recycling pretty much anything that we can. So as a result of that, we still call it CCNB, but it's not so much recycled newspapers. It could be other packaging, cardboard, things like that, corrugated, I should say. And as a result, over the years, the back has kind of shifted from being more gray to being a little bit more brown. And you'll see the backside shade vary depending upon what the mill happens to be recycling that day. And there's really no way to specify, hey, I want more of a gray back, or I want more of a tan or whatever. It's kind of potluck. Whatever they happen to be recycling is what you're going to get. And so let me just show you an example of that.
Sure. Yeah, I think I've seen this board before because there's like sometimes you can see flecks of color from whatever they've recycled.
Yeah. So this is clay coated newsback. It's got a white coating on the front, and this happens to be a little bit more brown.
Sure.
Brown on the back. And this type of board is used for typically lower end folding cartons, like cereal boxes, parts that you might buy in a hardware store, things like that. There's not a whole lot of strength. There's no real special qualities. It's just a basic paperboard for basic folding carton packaging. Sure. We move up from that to CCKB, which is clay coated kraft back, which looks just like CCNB, except it's a little browner, and there are some strength properties. So it's a little bit stronger, a little bit more durable when you get into packaging that requires that type of attributes. And then we move up to clay coated whiteback. We don't see a whole lot of this in the industry, but clay coated whiteback is basically a CCNB that the backside is white. It's not going to be a pure white, but it is going to be whiter than a CCNB type of product. And some customers want that. They want a white inside to their box versus the brown or the tan. And so clay coated white back fills that niche.
So is that still a recycled content?
It is. It's still recycled. Um, it may be bleached a little bit to make it whiter than it is
Okay.
tan.
Hmm. So those recycled fibers are bleached?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So it basically has kind of a line. You might say it's got a liner on the backside to make it white.
Okay.
So, okay. So now we look at this pyramid. This is the hierarchy of basic coated paper boards. And at the top of the pyramid is what we call
Mhm.
SBS, which is solid bleach sulfate. At, that probably not, here, it's neither here nor there to most consumers. But what that board is it's white. It's coated. It's got a coating on one side, so it's got a great print surface. The backside is uncoated, but it's still white. This is typically
Okay. Yeah.
a non-recycled product, and it's white on both sides. It's got good strength properties, excellent printability, and this you're going to see this more in higher end packaging where people want the bolder
Mhm.
graphics. Maybe they're going to do some foils, things like that, to really make that package stand out, and they want a white inside.
Mhm.
Um, Next, we move to CUK, which is solid unbleached craft, or excuse me, coated unbleached craft. And this is also not recycled, but it's white on the front side, so it's got a great print surface. It's tan on the back, and
Mhm.
this has a lot of strength properties. You will see this type of product used primarily for beverage carriers, 12 packs, things like that, where it's got the bold graphics on the outside, tan on the inside. And it's got a lot of strength so that you can pick up, your 4 pack, your 12 pack, etc. There's also a version of this that has wet strength uh, properties added to it, so that if you set uh, your pack of beverages in your cooler or whatever, the package won't disintegrate. So that is a little bit more of a specialty, but it is available, and people should be aware of it if you are doing beverage packing. The next on the pyramid is the at the bottom is the CCMB, which we talked about. So as you move
Yeah.
from quality and price, you start at the top, the
Mhm.
SBS, then you're going to move down to a CUK or a SUS. And SUS is basically a brand name.
Okay.
SUS is like Kleenex. SUS is like
It's the
Kleenex.
same thing.
Um, CUK is coated unbleached craft, which is like saying facial tissue, and SUS is Kleenex. It just happens. It's the same type of product. One is just a brand name from a specific mill. Okay, so as we talked about, we've been talking about coated paperboard, and we talked about CRB, coated recycled board, and subcategories of that are CCNB, um, CCK, clay coated craft back, and clay coated white back. As I mentioned, we see this for a lot of food, cereal boxes, things like that, toy packaging, dry foods, etc. And then we talked about CUK and SUS, which is non-recycled. It has more strength properties. It has a better coating on the outside, a better white coating, and this is where it's primarily used in higher food packaging or beverage packaging, where you have higher strength requirements. And then at the top of the scale, we talked about SBS, and that was the one that was also non-recycled, has a great coating on one side, white on both sides. It's higher brightness. It's a stiff sheet, and this is more for higher end packaging, uh, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, even some food packaging where they want a white box for different meals, things like that. But this is very versatile. Uh, SBS can be used for a wide variety of applications.
Yeah, and I know that one time I did a project where um a bunch of cartons went inside a case. And when you think about that, the cartons can provide compression strength for your case. So when you're designing a case and you have cartons going in, just make sure that you're testing the whole unit because the cartons will add compression strength. Therefore, you can use a lower grade corrugated.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, while we move on, we're gonna pivot here a little bit because this is something near and dear to everybody's heart. Sustainability. It's a hot topic. It's been so for many years, and there's a lot of misnomers and things around sustainability as far as some of the different agencies and things like that. So there's in North America, there's two primary um, agencies when it comes to environmentally friendly product, and the first is FSC, which is the Forest Stewardship Council. Um, they do they have a verification process as far as tracking where the fiber came from, all the way from the forest through the paper mill, through printing, folding carton production, and beyond. Um, so that is something that for people who are really looking to make sure that they're buying environmentally sustainable product, FSC is one of the leading organizations to ensure that you're getting product that is sustainable, uh, fiber that's being sourced in a sustainable manner, and it also takes into account the indigenous people of an area. If the pulp is coming from South America or Asia or wherever, that is also part of their certification. Next is SFI, which is Sustainable Forestry Initiative. This is from the AF&PA. Their goals are very similar to make sure that fiber is sourced in a sustainably friendly manner and that the forests are being managed for growth and to lessen any kind of environmental impact. Chain of custody is a term that basically for these different organizations, even if you are if you're a company that is not making the paper or paper board, you still need to be certified for chain of custody. So, in order to say that a product is a package is FSC certified, those entities from the, the folks who are doing the harvesting of the trees, to the ones making the paperboard, to the ones who are converting the paperboard into sheets, to those who are printing it and turning it into cartons, every person in that chain needs to be able to certify that it maintains the FSC standards. And if one link in that chain is broken, then technically it's not FSC certified. So chain of custody is a critical component.
Okay, so then if you're an organization that's concerned about sustainability and you want to make sure that trees are harvested instead of out of the forest, out of a managed forest versus the rainforest, for example, would you say that either FSC or SFI are great options? Do they vary by region or location, or like why are there two different certifications?
Uh, there's a lot of overlap between the two. I think you would find that FSC sometimes is a little bit more rigorous as far as being able to be certified. But they both have similar objectives. It's a similar process. SFI is also backed by the industry. So there are slight differences, but their objectives are pretty much the same.
Okay.
There's also one for Europe called PEFC, which is basically it's the European version of FSC. So very similar organization.
Cool. All right. Environmental definitions. Let's go.
Yeah, we'll talk about fiber. We talk about virgin fiber, which is fiber that is its first time um, being pulped, chipped, pulped, and turned into some sort of a paperboard product. You've got recycled fiber that has gone through the process and has been reclaimed and reused. But within recycled, there's a differentiation that most consumers aren't aware of. So paperboard mills for a long time have been recycling paperboard. They have material that maybe comes off that's out of spec, whatever. They throw it right back in, they repulp it, and they reuse it. That's been happening ever since the beginning of time. That is recycled, but it is not post consumer. So for people who are conscious about keeping waste out of the landfill, the thing that they want to look for is post consumer content. And in order to qualify as post consumer, the product has actually had to have been used by the public and reclaimed and repulped. So scrap from the mill that stayed at the mill, even though it was made into a final product, is not post consumer because it did not go out and live its life, with its intended purpose and come back as
Sure,
reclaimed.
that makes sense.
Um, then we talk about bleaching process, and this is one too where people are very concerned. Um, when we take, trees, wood is brown, and to go from brown fiber to a white sheet, there has to be some process to bleach it. And there's an environmental, excuse me, an elemental chlorine free process that's kind of an oxygenated bleaching process that has been in use for quite a while. It is more modern. Way back in the day, they used a true bleaching process with chlorine. The industry has moved away from that, probably 30 years ago, and gone to elemental chlorine-free bleaching. Um, it's an oxygenated, but there's still maybe trace elements of chlorine or dioxins and things in the process. Then you have TCF. TCF is totally chlorine free, and this is bleaching without the use of chlorine and any other related type of components. And there are mills that are TCF. It's not as
Okay,
common, and many times that TCF product can be a little bit more expensive.
okay. Um, in terms of recycled fiber, if an organization wants to use a recycled fiber, can you talk a little bit about availability? Like, are people pretty good about recycling paper? So is the availability pretty solid? I know, like in um, plastics, PCR, it's getting harder to find the PCR resin. But in terms of the paperboard market, would you say it's pretty easy to get 100%? And is it a lot cheaper than the virgin fiber? Can you speak to that?
To get 100% post consumer is still a challenge, because it, it's a challenge in that availability of recycled fiber can vary, depending upon different municipalities, how much they're recycling, things like that. And it's also it's sold on the open market, so sometimes there can be competition for that recycled fiber, and so that can be a challenge. So most paperboard, other than SBS and the CUK, which are not recycled typically. Some SBS is becoming recycled, but typically it's not. So you get to the recycled boards, like for example, CCNB. CCNB is close to being 100% recycled, and depending upon where it came from, it's going to be 30 to upwards of 50% post consumer.
Okay.
Um, and so that's why it looks like it does. It's at that lower end of the market, but it does have very high recycled content and very high post consumer content. Um, so it really depends on the availability on the market as far as recycled fiber
Sure.
availability. But the industry's been doing recycling for many
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
and pretty much any paper board, unless it has some sort of a specialty coating, pretty much any paperboard is recyclable. So with that, why don't we move on to the recycled symbols so we can talk a little bit about that.
All right.
There's a lot of recycled symbols in use, and sometimes people take a little bit of liberties with them. Um, but at a very basic level, we're going to talk about three different recycled symbols. The first is the chasing arrows with the solid black background, and this means that the product is produced using recycled materials. Um, it also means that it's made from 100% post consumer waste, um, that's been reclaimed, from households, commercial facilities, etc. So chasing arrows with a black background is 100% post. Then you have the green chasing arrows with just a white background, but you have a percentage sign in there, and that will show you what percentage of the materials are recycled. And for example, if it's a 50% recycled, you'll see a 50, inside the chasing arrows. This doesn't necessarily tell you how much of it is post consumer. The next symbol is black arrows, white background. There's nothing in the middle, and this just denotes that a product is recyclable. And like I said, most paperboard, unless it's got some kind of a special coating or special additive, they are recyclable. And we have the infrastructure and things in place in most municipalities to collect that and recycle it. So, Jessica, in a nutshell, those are the kind of that's a basic high level overview of paperboard, its uses, and some of the environmental concerns that go with it. Um, Questions or anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple questions. So, as you think about
Okay,
using a virgin carton versus a recycled carton, you can use a thinner you can use a thinner paperboard for a carton that is a virgin fiber, and you need a little more robust or a thicker board for 100% recycled content if you're going to get the same compression strength. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how price kind of weighs in, because I know the recycled board is typically cheaper, but then if you kind of combine it with what I said earlier, what's really the best financially?
sure. So there's a lot to unravel there. First of all, the CCNB type of product is less expensive. Um, Maybe not so much because it's recycled, but just because of the type of coating that it has. Some of the strength properties, the printability, things like that. It is a lower end grade. Um, in the packaging world, for the past probably 15 years or so, one of the key things that we've been looking at is what we call lightweighting. And that is that if you had a folding carton, let's say it was made out of 20 point, um, the pressure is to, well, can I make that same carton out of an 18 or a 16 point and still have a lot of the same stiffness and rigidity as I had with 20 point? And so, that's something to consider, because that light weighting, if you're depending on the percentage difference of the weight of that carton, first of all, your material will cost less because it's sold based on weight. But then you have downstream effects, as far as once you've fulfilled that box and you're now shipping it to a retail store, a distribution center, whatever, it also saves on your shipping costs because you're shipping a lighter weight package. So those are things to take a look at. You want to still make sure that you have enough strength, stiffness, and things to fulfill the end use of the type of package that you're creating. But lightweighting is definitely an area where we're seeing a lot of development in paperboard, making it stiffer, making it
Cool.
stronger, but making it lighter weight.
Sure. That makes sense. Okay, and now I have another question. It's about sustainability. So, when you think
Okay.
about making paper or recycling paper, it's a very water intensive process. At times, the water to fiber ratio is like 90 some percent water,
99.
fiber. Yeah, 99. And so, as I think about our greatest gift on earth, fresh water, how does paper processing kind of reuse water or try to minimize the wastewater in the process to save fresh water?
Sure. Um, so mills. paperboard mills typically are located next to a water source. In North America, we typically have built them along rivers, so we are taking water from the river. We're using it in the paper making process, but then also we are cleaning it and then putting it back into the river. And in most cases, the water that we are putting back into the river is cleaner than the water that we took out. So there's been a lot of work done in the past century about
Hmm.
cleaning that water, make sure that it's sustainable, and returning that water back to its source in a better condition than when it was taken. Um, a lot of
Yeah,
paper
that's really
mills
good
will
to hear.
have massive ponds, where they
Mhm.
are cleaning that water. Um, and uh, I know of one paper mill in particular that one of the things that they use to test the cleanliness of the water are trout. Trout are a very fragile species, and so by having trout in their final stage pond, it's just an early indicator as to how clean that water is if it's sustainable for the trout.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. I also have one other question about considerations for printing on the different substrates because we have different surfaces.
So typically in the boards that we talked about today, your best print surface is going to be on SBS. It's got a higher level coating. It's very uniform. Um, you're going to get it's a brighter, typically a brighter sheet. So as far as your ink gloss, things like that, the white SBS, white on both sides, is going to be your best printing substrate. Then typically your CUK, your sus, um, is going to be next. This is the one that's used for a lot of beverage packaging that we talked about. That will typically be your next best printing sheet, and then bringing up the end as we talked about. It's all price value relationship. The CCNB typically does not have quite as uniform of a coating. It's a lower cost sheet, and your printing will look a little bit different on that type of a product.
All right. Cool. So I can think of another question. As we think about back kind of to sustainability, a lot of food and beverage companies are trying to move away from plastic containers and into paper containers. And there are challenges to that, particularly if it's going to be in a freezer or a refrigerator. A lot of those boards are double side coated with poly, which means they can't be recycled. Um, so maybe you could speak a little bit to industry shifts to more paper based containers, some of the challenges and maybe some of the innovations that you've seen um, coming out of that industry.
Sure, and that is a valid concern. This is an area where I don't have a lot of experience, but it's a hot area, and that is paper cup. There's differences between hot and cold paper cup. Cold cup, you have to have a coating on both sides because the cup sweats, and if it's not coated on the outside, the cup will start to kind of disintegrate. Paper cup has been a challenge because historically it's had a poly coating on the inside. Now, the mills have made major gains in coming up with an alternative type of additive or an alternative coating other than poly to make a sustainable paper cup that can be recycled. So there's new developments happening all the time on that, but right now we are on the cusp of having more and more paper cups that can be fully recycled because they do not have a poly coating. Um, you mentioned freezer. There's in the CUK lineup. Um, Once again, different mills have different additives that they're putting in to give it, water, moisture resistance, things like that that don't involve a poly coating. And so, once again, the buyer work with supplier. They can show you those different alternatives, and you can see how they look, how they print, and how they will work for your application.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right. Well, I think I'm out of questions. So I want to thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tom Hoederle from Mankato Packaging. And thanks everyone for your time.
Yep. My pleasure. Thank you.